And I think that when we call a spade, our children really are pretty amazing and empathetic. But sometimes as moms, as teachers, we have this perfectionistic attitude about ourselves and what a mother should be, right?
Yeah. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Uplift for Her, Everyday Wellness for Women. I am so glad you are here. Thank you for tuning in. I could not be more excited about our guest today. We have with us Dorie Haws. And Dorie, I'll give you a chance to explain kind of what you do, but thank you, first of all, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me. This is what I love to do, is talk about children and talk about wellness. So yeah, it's great.
So I told Dorie before this that this is mostly selfish because I'm just going to get like advice for myself here. And on my own two little kids, I have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so I am right here in the thick of like, wait, how do I take care of myself and take care of these kids and make sure that everything is working together? So I hope this will be really meaningful actually for a lot of women.
Yeah. Great.
Well, tell us first a little about yourself and what you do.
Okay. So I work at BYU. And so I teach here at the university. I spent about 10 years in the public schools. I spent a couple years overseas in Japan, and children are just my jam. I like to work with children. But when I first came to BYU, I had an opportunity to be a supervisor of student teachers. And so I gave up my classroom. And I did that for a couple of years and recognized that at the end of that assignment, I really missed working with children. And so this job at BYU came up where I get to work with children. I get to teach BYU students how to work with children. And seriously, I thought that I had died and gone to heaven at this point. And so I've been here for almost 25 years and absolutely love what I get to do with adults, with parents, and with the littles. So I model for the teachers for the first 4 weeks. And then I step into what we call a booth, and I give them feedback on how they're doing. And I go in and out of the classroom so that I'm the consistent presence for the children. But I spend a lot of time in the booth speaking with parents on parenting tactics. I teach a parenting class here on campus. I have a vlog that is called Just Keep Parenting,
which is amazing,
which I started as I was teaching this parenting class. They said, we need more information when it was over. And I thought, well, I'm not very good at vlogging, and it's not very professional by any means, but it does just kind of give us some snippets of what we can do a little bit better today. So
it's perfect. And I love your videos. Yeah. So the preschool that you are in, what ages are the kids there?
So it's actually called the Child and Family Studies Laboratory. Mm-hmm. And so it's in the School of Family Life. And the kids they have to be 4 by September 1st. And then about just over 10 years ago, we brought in a kindergarten program.
Okay.
So they can go to preschool and then kindergarten here.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, Dorie, I wanted to talk a little bit about wellness. And the way that I think about wellness is how we incorporate everyday tips and tricks and routines and habits into our lives so we can live the most meaningful, intentional, and happiest life possible. And when we think about working with kids, a lot of the women who listen to me are moms and little kids and big kids, but I think a lot of it is fairly generalizable. And as an OBGYN and sort of women's wellness expert here, I talk to women all the time about the struggles that come with being a mom. And there are absolutely good things about being a mom, 100%. But sometimes when you're in the thick of it from day to day, it's hard to feel that this is great. I think it's easy to let those thoughts sneak in of like, why did we do this? I mean, I know it's a good thing and I'm glad they're here, but this is so hard.
Hard today.
It's so draining. Yeah. So there are some ways that I was thinking that being a mom or being around children, even older children, can really be withdrawals on our bank account, so to speak, can really take away from our wellness. What thoughts do you have about that just to start with? Is that something that you've seen from the side that you're in?
Yeah. Funny thing, last week in class, so I teach a couple of courses on campus to early childhood students. And one of the discussions that we had last week was on contemporary challenges. And so I had the students all submit a question based on their reading and on their thoughts about what they were worried about in becoming a teacher.
Uh-huh.
And one of the ones that came up again and again was, how do I manage it all?
Yeah.
Right. And that's really what moms do is, right. They're thinking, how do I manage this all?
Yeah.
And so we talked a lot about boundaries, about working smarter and not harder, right? And what that looked like maybe from a teaching viewpoint. But I think it's very similar to that of being a mother. And how do we teach and yet still have boundaries, right? So that we don't get overwhelmed, because we know if we get overwhelmed, we get burnt out, and then it's like,
then no one's winning.
I'm done, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we talked a lot about, as we set boundaries with children, right, we've got to set boundaries for ourselves as well. One of the things that we have in the classroom is we have those IKEA egg chairs. And so you can just pull the top down and just be by yourself, right? And that kind of reminds me of sometimes what I feel that moms could do for themselves, right? And I'm amazed at how the children, I will say to them, it looks like I need to have a little alone time. So I'll just be right back. I'm going to go outside and get a drink of water. I'm going to come back in and we're going to finish this, right? And I think that when we call a spade, our children really are pretty amazing and empathetic. But sometimes as moms, as teachers, we have this perfectionistic attitude about ourselves and what a mother should be, right?
Yeah.
And when in reality, we all put on our pants the same way. We get, and some of us may have gifts and talents that we look at and we say, gosh, I wish I had that as a mom or as a teacher, right? But in reality, it all comes down to, what are your boundaries and do you have a balance? I know that that's something that you talk about with your 6 pillars of wellness.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And we have to find that balance. And so going back to the egg chair again, the mother yesterday said, so is that like a timeout? And I said, well, I'm not necessarily an advocate of a timeout, but the children choose that. So when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're feeling sad, when they're feeling nervous, I am amazed at how many of them will just go sit in that egg chair, pull down the top, and they're there for maybe 3, 4, maybe 10 minutes, right? But it's all self-chosen. And sometimes I'll say, it looks like you're frustrated, sweetie. Do you need to go sit in the alone time chair or get some nervous cream or some cranky cream, which is just lotion with an emoji on it, right? But what we're trying to do at that point is teach these kids self-regulation tools. And I think as a mom, we have to do that, right? Yeah. We have to be able to model self-regulation for our children and what that looks like in our life. Your self-regulation, Mallory, is going to be different than mine. We had a really stressful day a couple of weeks ago. We had a crane here. We couldn't play on the playground. There was an electrician in the bathroom. Can you imagine a bathroom of 4-year-olds and not being? It was just stressful, right?
Yeah.
And as I walked by the secretary's desk, we have some really nice smelling lemon lotion. And after the 5th time of me pumping lotion as I would walk by, she said, Dorie, what are you doing? And I said, I'm self-regulating. And she's pretty new to our office. And she said, what does that mean? And I said, when I'm stressed, I know the tools that I can use to help myself de-stress.
Yeah.
So, looking in my office, I have bottles of lotion, right, that I use to help myself not reinvent the boundary, but remind myself that I do have boundaries.
So what would you say? Does that make sense? Yeah, totally. What would you say? So busy mom at home, or even the working moms, they come home from work and it's like instant overstimulation and thinking about all these things. What are some ideas of what she could do? I think part of what comes to my mind is, well, I can't just ignore the kids. Like if I say, like, I'm going to go have alone time, what are they going to do? And, so what are some things that we can learn how to teach our kids that we need that time ourselves? Right. We need to take that time.
Right. I think the biggest thing, Mallory, really is communication, right? Communication before we reach that edge of, I'm going to pop, right? And so as we talked about the contemporary challenges again, I said to the teachers, one of the things that as teachers, we show up sick, right? We show up to teach sick because it's easier than getting a sub.
Yeah.
That correlates back to moms, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when dads are sick, they get to go to bed, right? But moms sometimes can't do that, right? And so we just have to work through it. So as we're thinking about that, one of the things that I said to the teachers is, we just have to communicate to the kids. I would show up sick, feeling awful, and I would say to the children, you know what? I do not feel well today. So today's going to be one of those days when we just get by, right? And so I was amazed at how the children rose to that occasion. And so sometimes I think that we have these expectations on ourselves as women, as mothers, that this is what the kids expect. This is what my husband or this is what my spouse, right, my partner expects of me. When in reality, we haven't ever asked, right? These are our expectations. And so being able to say, you know what, sweetie, mama just needs 10 minutes. So I'm going to put you here reading this book. I'm going to do this. You can go do this or this or this. And then in 10 minutes, you've gone and done what you needed to do, whether it's go to the restroom or the lady on social media that locked herself in the closet to have some licorice. Have you seen that video? And she has her kids underneath, looking up. I just thought that's totally what it's about, is having a few moments. Yes, the kids need you, right? But the fact of the matter is, I'm going to be a better human and a better mom if I can go have that. And I'm not just saying alone time, but whatever it is, whether you need to make a phone call, whether you need to go have a chat with your partner, just talk to the kids and say, mommy's going to, set a timer. Kids are so concrete that if we have one of those sand timers, right, so that they can see in 10 minutes, mom's going to be back and and they're watching that salt fall, right? Sometimes we expect our kids to understand, and they do understand emotionally. But that physical piece of it, it's like, wait a minute, I need her right now. But if they can see the concreteness of, oh, she's going to be back when that sand comes down, right? Then we can help our children help us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And it makes me think of, a couple things. One, I love that you said, communicate clearly. I mean, one of my favorite young parenting books I've read is It's Respectful Based Parenting. And it's very much about talking to your infant, talking to them and saying, I have to go take a shower. I know you're going to be sad, but I will be right back. And even as they're infants, that they start to kind of pick this up instead of like changing their diaper and you put them down and you whip the diaper off and cold wet wipe and you don't say anything. Of course they're going to cry. So even from an early stage, being able to learn how to communicate, because that's not something that we're used to doing as kids.
No,
we have to learn.
Yes. I remember when I was getting my first master's degree with human development, right? And it had an early childhood emphasis. I remember one of my chairs talking about how he would take his child at church, and if they were fussy at church, he would take them out and he would talk to them. He wasn't talking to the child so the child would calm necessarily. He was teaching himself how to talk to the child, right? Because we do all this wonderful talking with infants, but then we all of a sudden just stop as they grow up, right? And so he said, we don't know how to talk to kids because we've been talking to adults.
Yeah.
There's a way. We use a book in class called Choose Your Words, Communicating with Your Young Children. And it talks all about conciseness so that we don't confuse children, because we use a lot of idioms. We use a lot of, today in class, we were talking about, my dad says there's forks in the road, right? And so if you think about what a child thinks about, there's literal forks that are in the roads, right?
Yeah.
Fred Gwyneth has some really great books about really how young children think about adults speak.
Yeah.
Right? And so one of the things I think we have to think about is, are we being clear to a child? Now, that doesn't mean we're dumbing it down for them, but it does mean that we're being concise and we're saying it in a very concrete way.
Yeah.
And so I just remember him, he finally went to the custodial closet, this chair of mine, because he was getting all kinds of weird looks from people. Like, what are you doing? But he said, we do have to learn how to talk to children as adults because we've outgrown that, right? And so part of our frustration is as we talk about working smarter and not harder, right? Part of that is learning how to communicate with children at their developmental level.
Yeah.
Because when we communicate with them from our level, we confuse them. And sometimes then that causes stress and maybe behavior problems that really don't need to be there.
And that's huge. And that was one of the things you talked about on a vlog that I just watched recently, is you talked about sometimes as parents, we're so well-intentioned to be gentle and kind that in the process, we kind of lose clarity. And so maybe you can think of an example that of that. I can't think at the moment, but just the idea of like, oh, sweetie, we shouldn't do that. And they're like, but I just didn't. Like, and instead just saying, you have to stop doing that now.
Right.
You know.
Right. There's a great story that I use in one of my parenting classes. I was at Home Depot, and there was one of those big ladders, and it had "keep off" written on it, right? And there was a little 4-year-old, and there was 2 women. And one woman said, as the boy started to get up the ladder, she said, "Well, I don't think that's a very good idea," right? And he kept going. And she said again, "You might get hurt if you go any further," right? And he just kept going. And finally, the other lady said, "Dude, there's a sign on there that says keep off. So you need to get down," right? And he totally just got off the ladder.
Yeah.
And that has always just been like this light bulb of, yes, we just need to say it, right? And not try to be, sometimes my teachers struggle because they want the kids to like them, right? And as parents, I think we go through that stage sometimes. But we've got to be able to say it in a way that they understand. And it's not being mean. It's just being firm, right? We've got to say it simply. We've got to say it kindly, firmly, and consistent. And if we can do those 4 things, then our life really is going to be easier. And we're going to not have those behavior moments where we think, oh my gosh, is this really happening to me?
Yeah.
In the grocery store or even at home, right? And so sometimes I think we can make our life better if we just think about the words that we're using with children.
I love that. And it makes me think there's a mindfulness technique that uses words where when you're feeling really activated or really overwhelmed or out of the moment, that you can bring yourself back to the present by looking around and saying, I see a light switch. I see a picture. I see the carpet. And that's actually, it seems like that would be a really great way to practice with your young ones, is to just like, if you don't know what's going on or what to do, like just start like the facts, like you're upset right now. I'm feeling stressed right now. It's really noisy in here.
Yeah.
And just to start, like, I think it would be like 2 for 1, because it would help for mindfulness for yourself and start to lower your own stress response. And probably the same stress response for kids as they recognize that, yeah, I can see that. That's true. Right. Oh, that's true too, and start to kind of wind that down.
Just to de-escalate, right? Because it's pretty easy for us to get escalated.
Yeah.
And as we escalate, right, we're back in that brainstem, right? We want to fight or flight. And so one of the things that we talk to the children about a lot, and I think it comes back to adults, is we have to get up to our thinking brain, right? And so we have to have those tools that we use to do that. And so, we joke in the world of women that maybe a Diet Coke or maybe a piece of chocolate will help us do that. When in reality, right, it's those mindfulness techniques that say to us, stop, take a deep breath, and relax.
The same as kids.
Yes, right? And so that's the thing that I think is so amazing about life, Mallory, is when I teach the parenting classes, the principles are the same, whether we're 4 or whether we're 40, right? The principles are the same. I think as we grow up and start to adult, then we start to feel the pressures that we may bring on ourselves, right? But I think we have to figure out there again how to set those boundaries so that we can have that time, so that we can be more mindful and can be, I think, better humans if we take a little bit of those, for lack of a better word, that alone time. And I'm not saying just to be alone. I'm using that very generally, right?
Yeah.
But whatever it is that sometimes we need to kind of de-escalate and get ourselves back into that mindset of, okay, I'm a mom. What do I have to accomplish tonight, right? Helping those kids help you, right? Sometimes you're like, I got to get this all done. Well, what can the kids do to help you accomplish that, right? I love the fact that 4-year-olds can sort socks because they're pretty good sorters, right? And so what can I have them do to make my life a little easier?
Yeah.
I know that I don't mean to belittle that by any means, but I think that sometimes we take it on ourselves when in reality we could think outside the box to be able to say, okay, what could make my life easier right now? How could the kids help me?
Yeah. And I love that you talked about space there, because one of the things that I have learned about myself recently is I have, a go style of job. And I'm OBGYN, I'm going, taking care of patients, but it's all adult conversations. It's not a very noisy job. For the most part, I'm one-on-one talking to people, and I have this quiet drive home where I can listen to a podcast or whatever. And then I walk in the door right at, 5:36, and it's like chaos. Like my wonderful husband is trying to make dinner and the girls are going crazy and the house is a mess. And sometimes it's a big adjustment for me.
You bet.
To be like, oh, wait, okay, I'm on. Like,
you got to switch.
And at first I'm just like, okay, you have got to stop yelling.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I had to learn was to take that space, pull into the driveway, turn off the car,
and breathe.
Prepare. Switch gears, de-stress, switch into like mom hat. And I think that can be something that's different for working moms, is there is that space. I think our stay-at-home moms are, bless them, that is a lot of stimulation nonstop, but they have to do it. Like they have to be able to find that space too, or no wonder they would feel overactivated all the time and feel snappy or irritable if they do. And so I think finding that space, one of the things I talk about with my postpartum moms who come 6 weeks postpartum is, when's the last time you were not pulled on by a child?
Yeah.
And most of them don't even have 5 minutes. And so I'll tell them, like, go hide in your car for 5 minutes once your husband gets home. You have to be out of the house because otherwise you're going to be like, oh, I should do this.
Yep.
Yeah. So leave the house, set that boundary, find that space, and then go back to it feeling more rejuvenated. And 5 minutes is pretty magical. Like it doesn't have to be an hour.
It can do major things, right? Yeah. And as you're talking about coming home and taking that time in the car to breathe and to be mindful again, maybe that's your alone time, right? Before you go into what could be considered chaos, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's the hard part, Mallory, is in early childhood, we have developmentally appropriate practices is one of those words that we swing around a lot, right? But we talk about that in relation to what's appropriate developmentally for these kids. Well, what's appropriate developmentally for you, right? And for me, because we've got to find something that's going to work for us. And, we can listen to a podcast, we can listen to our friends, we can go to our OBGYN, and we've got all these ideas. But frankly, we have to figure out what's going to work for me.
Yeah.
Right. And what does that look like? And sometimes it's kind of like when you choose a teacher for your child, right? We go to our neighbors, we go to the people and say, so who's a good teacher, right? When actuality, what we need to be doing is looking at our child, right? And what our child needs, and then finding a teacher that fits that personality and those needs, right? So it's the same thing with us as women. We need to look at all these resources and then figure out what's going to work for me. Is it the 5 minutes in the car? Is it driving? I love to drive, right? And so sometimes I drive before I have to get home, right? If my nephews and nieces are there, the back door's open, right? And I don't have any time. And so I take a little drive around the neighborhood 3 or 4 times, right? Yeah. So working that into your life and into your schedule, I think is going to take some time and some real introspective thinking about what's best for me and my circumstances.
I love that you said that, because we are all filled and drained by different things, and some women may be filled by the same thing that is really draining and difficult on someone else. So to ask them, like, what works for you? That's just not going to be helpful. So figure out what is most draining to you and what is most filling to you. I think that leads in well to another question I wanted to ask you, because the question that I have is, how do we as women, and I think this is generalizable, but we'll say specifically with kids, how do we feel more, how do we enjoy our time with our kids more? How do we feel more filled? Because I think there is so much asked of us that it can leave us feeling pretty depleted. And I think there are some moms that may not struggle with this. Some moms may have this great, like, I love being a mom all the time, and I just love being with my kids. And that is wonderful. I, of course, see the women who are feeling stressed or overwhelmed, and that's kind of what they bring up at their visits. So I know that there are a lot of women who from time to time feel like, I just don't know, like, how to be filled by these kids. I feel like I'm only drained by these kids.
Right. And we talked today in class, actually, about recognizing the pleasure that children bring to us, right? Now, they don't bring us pleasure 24/7, right?
Right.
I'm quite happy when I get to go home.
Yeah.
And it's quiet for me at home,
Yeah.
right? There's not 20 kids running around. However, when I am with them, right, and this is a little different because I'm with them during the day. And so we talked about when we find pleasure with kids, we have to grab onto that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as moms, there are so many different hats that are going on, right? You're the nurse, you're the teacher, you're the provider, you're the playmate, you're the all those things that teachers are for 6 hours a day. Well, you get to do it for however many hours that you're home from your job, or if you're a stay-at-home mom, then you're doing it all day, right? And so finding pleasure in those moments, I think, is the key, because sometimes kids push our buttons. And sometimes I focus on that pushing rather than, oh my gosh, that was the funniest thing that just happened.
Yeah.
And we can laugh and we can, we can go back and say, can we talk about that again? Because that just made my day, right? And so making sure that those kids, the other day, this kid came up to me and he had a buzz. And I said, hey, buddy, I noticed you got a new haircut. And he's like, yep, all of them are cut, Miss Dorie. It was like this. And I said, well, can I feel it? And he said, yeah. And he puts his head down and I said, well, it feels like peach fuzz. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, your hair doesn't look like peach fuzz, Miss Dorie. But even though it's curly, it looks okay. We laughed and laughed at that, right? Because we were comparing hairstyles with each other. And so I think one of the things that as moms is being able to find moments where we just find pleasure, right? Because there are moments that are we want to pull our hair out, or we may want to go lock ourselves in the closet, or we want to really talk back to that child.
Yeah.
But I think it's that muscle. You and I, before we went on air, were talking about muscle memory and how we have to create those muscles, whether it's physical muscles, whether it's muscle memory in our brain. But I think if we can look at those pleasurable moments that we find with our kids, we may have to look really hard, right? Some days, but being able to find those pleasurable moments and just melt into that. Yeah. Remember that, right? I had so much fun with her today. She made me laugh. She made me giggle, right? And so that then we're looking for more of those moments rather than the other type of moments that I think can really take over our lives and turn us into a negative Nelly, if you will.
I think that's really powerful. We talk about social wellness and we have these 6 pillars. And one of these pillars is our social relationships and how our relationships contribute to our overall well-being. And those of us who are spending a lot of time, especially with any kids, young kids or older kids, that's a big play into our overall well-being. And if it can raise our overall well-being or it can lower our overall well-being, just like any of the other 6 pillars. And so by bringing in just a little bit of that joy, a little bit of the appreciation of a craziness and funny kids and whatever it is, like, hey, you're kind of fun. Like the more we can bring in even just those little moments, it will boost our overall satisfaction with that social wellness. It doesn't sound very warm and fuzzy, but it does. It makes our overall outlook on our relationships raise a little bit, and that will raise our overall well-being.
Right. I think humor has good healing power for all of us, right? Yeah. And so if we can look at situations and find the humor in it. I was in Arizona last weekend and I got bumped from a flight because Sky Harbor Airport, somebody hit a transformer. Oh, and so it shut down and things were a mess, right? And so I got bumped from my flight. I had to wait an hour and a half for somebody to take me to the hotel that they were going to pay for. And then I had to be back quickly, like in 4 or 5 hours for a flight. And I was on the phone to my sister. And I said, you know what? I'm kind of cranky about this. But I'm sure tomorrow I'm going to find some humor in this, right? And so I think as women, we really are pretty good at seeing the positive. But when we're in a mess, like if we're postpartum or if we're suffering from depression and those things, it gets harder for us, right? Yeah. And so even writing those things down, right? What moments brought me pleasure today, especially from the kids, or maybe it's from a mate, a partner, or maybe it is, maybe I think I'm from Australia and I call my friends mates. I don't know. But I think, being more intentional helps us to create those pleasurable moments.
I love that. I think that's definitely true. Another thing I wanted to talk about is I noticed recently that my expectations as a mom, I think, are flawed. So I, as a working mom, have always felt a lot of tension, a lot of conflict internally of I want to be home all the time, but I value what I do for a career. And I think I add something there.
You're making a difference. Yep.
I hope so. And so it's been a big conflict for me internally for, well, the whole time that I've been a mom. And I realized recently that my expectations were that a good mom is with her kids 24/7. And I don't know where that came from. Like I never have anyone tell me that, but I recognized that when my daughter started going to school and I realized like, oh, wait, she's at school and I'm not failing as a mom. So like, what is the difference for me? And that's something I'm still trying to work through and figure out for me. What is that expectation and what do I want as a mom? Right. But along those same lines, can you talk about that as you have thoughts and also needs of kids, what kids need from their caregivers in that stage? Because there must be something flawed about my belief that in order for a child to be well taken care of, their mom needs to be with them 24/7, right? That makes sense to me that that's flawed. But then what do they need?
Right. I think, we have a culture that, I thought that if I was going to be a good human, that I would be able to have kids, right? And I never got to have any kids of my own. And so this guilt that we put on ourselves, right? This expectation of what it means to be a good human, what it means to be a good mom. I think that much of that is there again, coming from our culture and coming from flawed expectations, as you talked about, right? And so I think one of the things that goes back there again, Mallory, to our expectations of what does a good mom do, right? A good mom loves her kids. Okay, so what does that look like? And what does that sound like? Right? For you, Mallory, it's going to be different than it is for me, right? And so there again, we have this tendency to compare ourselves with others. And one of the things that I think we have to do internally is start to notice rather than judge. And that's actually what this week's video is about, right? Is figuring out that when we notice what's happening, all we're doing is communicating to the child what a camera can communicate, right? But sometimes when I say, Mallory, you did such a great job on that, right? I am judging you because I think you did a great job. And so then all of a sudden you're like, okay, so what does a great job mean? Does it mean that I got an A in my math test? And so then we have these skewed, and this is where I think our false expectations come from, right? Because as humans, we tend to judge each other rather than just notice, right? So for example, if a child was getting like Christmas is coming and they were getting candy from Santa that had just flown in on the fire truck and he's throwing candy out, it was Mallory, right? And that's all I said, because that's all that was happening. And sometimes we like to say, oh, that was such a kind thing. I noticed that you shared your candy, so then I'm judging her rather than noticing. So when she walks over to her mom, she said, I was a really good friend of Mallory. Well, that's not something I ever said to her, but she was able to figure that out, right? Because we noticed instead of judged. And so I think that's one thing we can do as parents to our kids is start noticing rather than saying judgments, right? About how they're performing.
What positive judgments.
Right. And I think if we do that, then hopefully this next generation, right, is going to be less concerned about what everybody else is doing and more concerned with, okay, what am I doing? And then we're not going to feel so judged, right? From others. And so as you talk about what do the kids need, right? And I said, they just need our love. There's a research study that's out there that says, if we can give kids 10 to 15 minutes of playing with them, 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes that sounds like not very much. And sometimes that sounds like I do not have that kind of time in my day, right? If we can do that, but bad behaviors will decrease just with 10 to 15 minutes of actually playing with a child. Because sometimes the way I play with the child is I'm trying to, I'm doing other things, right? And I'm not giving them my full attention. But this research talks about how if we give them that full attention to 10 to 15 minutes a day, that their positive behaviors will increase and negative behaviors is the word I was looking at, will decrease, right?
Yeah.
And so can we find 10 to 15 minutes in every day? Maybe, maybe not. but can we find 10 or 15 minutes throughout the week that we can incorporate? And maybe it's just doing laundry, sitting down and visiting with them. And maybe it's playing Legos, but as we find that we spend that time, that's what kids want. I don't know. There's probably a lot of parents that have read, Languages of Love, but they haven't, not a new one, but it's fairly new, about the 5 languages of children, right? The 5 love languages of children. And part of our job, I think, as adults in children's life is trying to figure out what their love language is, right? And then can we spend that time with them? Because with couples, that's what we're trying to do is figure out, okay, what's his language? What's her love language? And being able to love them that way, right? And so I think sometimes we spend a lot of time loving them like we want to be loved rather than how they want to be loved. And I think that goes back to parenting smarter, but not harder, right? And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's what's going around in my brain about.
Oh, totally.
How to help them.
I think that's exactly right. And I think by focusing on that, then we can we can allow ourselves a little more allowance, in saying like, you're not going to be there all the time. And even if you are going to be there all the time, you're not going to be perfect. You're going to mess up. Yeah. And there's going to be things that are not ideal and messy. And sometimes you are going to have to kind of push your kids aside so you can get household tasks done. Right. But if it comes back to keeping the core of what you want, it's one of the things I talk about with my wellness coaching is, at the very beginning, before we talk about anything, women will come and they say, I want to lose weight, or I want to, improve my marriage, or I want to show up better as a mom. And like, even before that, you say, well, what do you want? Who do you want to be? Right. And keeping that as core, like, I want to be a loving mom. Okay. Well, that can look a million different ways. Totally. And you get to choose the way that works best for you based on what you want. But if you're trying to create this system based on what someone else wants or what someone else is telling you you should want, that maybe isn't jiving with you, I think you get that for some women who are stay-at-home moms when they just don't like it, and vice versa. Women who have to work even though they'd really rather stay home. And there are logistics that sometimes can't be helped, but just in terms of like, well, what do you want? Don't create someone else's life. Right. Come back to who you want to be and who your child needs, and draw that system around there. And I mean, I think it all does come back to kids need to feel loved and safe,
Right. One of the things that we, another, life skill that we're working on with the children is rewinding, right? And so we actually do this hand motion with the kids. And I love it when my teachers finally start to do that. They make a mistake. The practicum students are doing their teaching this week. And yesterday, one of the teachers was like, oh, you guys, I totally got to rewind with me because I just made a mistake. We rewind and we try again, right?
Love that.
And I just think that, in my utopian world, I just think we'd all be rewinding, right? And we'd give others the power to rewind, to be able to say, you know what, I didn't do a very good job with that. And so if we yell at our kids or, if we push them off or whatever, because we're not perfect. And the soonest we can realize that I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, and give them that grace that rewinding affords us, I just think that we could have this amazing world, right? By recognizing that I'm not going to do it perfect and neither are you. So let me rewind and try again, right? Mm-hmm. And because that's why we're here. We're here to try to figure out how to be better humans.
Yeah.
And so as we rewind and move forward, I think that gives us a nice, not an out, but a try again.
Well, and it's based on, compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. And gosh, if we can teach our kids to grow up feeling compassion for themselves, to be patient with themselves and forgiving of themselves, and then to be compassionate and forgiving of others, like you said, world, that would be, right? Yeah. Well, Dorie, I feel like I could just talk to you forever and I should wrap it up, but I have really loved our conversation. I think that our social wellness is such a big part of who we are, and we can learn so much from the way that we interact with kids. And for some of us, that's a main part of our social life right now, is that relationship with kids. So by optimizing it and working towards it, we can sort of feel better. We can level up our wellness. And for those listening, check out Dorie's YouTube channel. And do you have an Instagram account still?
I do have an Instagram account, but I'm not very good at trying to post it up there. It's posted on Facebook.
So YouTube is the go-to.
YouTube is the go-to.
And her videos are so wonderful. They're short, sweet, to the point, really good, clear examples that will be just directly what you've been dealing with. I'm sure of it because it has been for me. And I think even if you're working with older kids, like even preteens or teens,
right.
I think some of the principles are the same, like clear communication.
Right.
I think I heard a parenting expert tell me one time that teenagers are very similar to parenting 3 to 5 years old.
Yes, totally. I say to my college, university students all the time, you're not much different than the kids that we're working with, right?
Yeah.
And as I teach those parenting courses, that's one of the things we talk about is the principles are the same. The carry out, right, how we do it is a little different, but the principle is still the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And tell us one more time how we can find you.
So it's on Just Keep Parenting.
Like your name, Dorie. Like Just Keep Swimming, but just
right.
Keep Parenting.
Yes, exactly. We looked up Just Keep Swimming and it was already taken.
Yeah.
You can also follow me on Facebook. It's just Miss Dorie's Preschool, BYU Preschool. And I do a lot of posting there about articles that don't necessarily go on the YouTube channel. But right now we're doing a book. Conscious Discipline is what we use here in the classroom with kids. So we're actually doing a book review on our blog and just a little bit of every week. So we'd love to have you join us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mallory.
Thanks for listening, and come back next time for another episode. And remember, this information is for education only and not intended to be medical advice.